Thanks for stopping by the USASOC Talks podcast network. Here you'll find different types of podcasts, everything from nutrition to perspective on soft experiences. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.
Welcome to the Thor3 podcast, a podcast based on human performance optimization. I'm your host, Christina, and we have Sean, our co-host.
Good morning.
And today we'll be discussing nutrition. So we have Jenny here. She's a registered dietitian and certified sports-specific dietitian with a background in athletics and tactical athletes as well.
Thanks for having me today.
So Jenny currently works at the JFK Special Warfare Center and School. And Jenny, I hear that intermittent fasting is becoming a pretty hot topic. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, it has been extremely popular in any of the briefs and consults that we have. So there's a lot of general curiosity about it currently. And intermittent fasting has been around for a long time. A lot of us sporadically, or I guess inadvertently, fast just by sleeping in late and missing breakfast, a busy schedule and missing lunch, skipping a snack here and there. But it really became popular in the UK in 2012 after a documentary, Eat Fast and Live Longer, was broadcast, and then after a book was published. And so now we see a lot of celebrities like Hugh Jackman, Benedict Cumberbatch, Jimmy Kimmel have attributed intermittent fasting to significant amounts of weight loss, in particular losing body fat. So that's why we're seeing an uptick in the intermittent fasting trends more recently.
Nice. So what exactly is intermittent fasting?
So intermittent fasting is, I guess, basically a purposeful decision not to eat for a certain period of time. So it's just a way of controlling the period in which food is actually consumed.
Okay.
Does this affect mood or cognition? Or I feel like if I'm not eating for a period of time, I'm going to be cranky. I'm going to get hangry. It's not going to go well.
A lot of us experience hunger when we don't eat for long periods of time, so I can relate to that for sure. So there have been a lot of proposed benefits and a lot of proposed negative side effects to the diet, and that's actually why I'd love to talk about it today, because there's a lot of controversy on the topic, and just try to dispel some of the myths around what's actually being published in the research. And we are seeing some physiological benefits, but we're also seeing some mental benefits, as well as people that are not enjoying it so much because of the hanger and then the subsequent large increase in food intake on the back end of when their fast is ended.
Yeah, I know. If I skip a meal, if I skip lunch or something, then dinner is going to be pretty big because I'm very hungry at that point.
Yeah, you're pretty much ready to chew off a finger at that point, or just wolf down a big meal.
So one of my questions is, if you're fasting, I know that some people will fast throughout the day and then just engorge themselves with food. And I know that causes a lot of obesity problems. So what's a good way to avoid binge eating after you fast?
Yes. So there are a few different methods to intermittent fasting.
Okay.
And one of those is time-restricted feeding, where you have a period of time within 24 hours that you're eating. So an 8-hour window where you eat, for example, and a 16-hour window where you fast. You could do an alternate day fasting where every other day you are minimizing the amount of calories that you intake. So, for example, one day you would eat normally, the next day you would only consume about 25% of your normal intake. Or the third method could be whole day fasting, where you go complete 24 hours, 1 to 2 times a week without eating food completely. There's a lot of different methods out there, and the reason I bring that up is to answer your question about trying to prevent some of the large intakes at the end of the day before you go to bed. Is if you are fasting for a complete 24-hour period, then people usually don't have to worry about that, because all they have to worry about is not eating until their window of fasting is complete.
Right.
So on the opposite end, if you're following a protocol where you're eating during an 8-hour window, for example, during the day, then we do see a lot of people who get large uptakes in hunger at the end of the day, and subsequently eat a lot of food. So it's in our physiology, and it's kind of unavoidable. If you're eating regularly every day, you're going to get hungry. So you're going to have to eat at some point in time.
So what should someone expect if they're doing the intermittent fasting, other than the hunger?
So someone should expect to obviously get hungry during intermittent fasting, but they also need to be able to deal with the delayed gratification. So dealing with the want to eat versus the actual physical hunger piece of that. And a lot of us have set schedules throughout the day.
Right.
You wake up at a certain time, you eat lunch at a certain time. In addition to that, you eat meals and snacks at certain times just because of your schedule. So, when you're on an intermittent fasting protocol, you have to be able to deal with that shakeup of your routine. You also need to be able to deal with maybe being a little bit moody at first, depending on how your body reacts to it. So, there are some things that will take getting used to. But also, as part of that, if you are exercising on an intermittent fasting protocol, then how are you going to deal with exercising while not fueling or on the back end of that feed window?
Right.
Yeah, it sounds like this particular type of dieting requires a lot of discipline.
It absolutely does. It takes a very disciplined manner to restrict your food intake, especially if you're exercising for an hour a day or several hours a day, because your physiology is going to draw you to want to eat food. And some of the hormonal changes that come with that. So, we typically get insulin spikes throughout the day that will make you hungry or make you sleepy. And with intermittent fasting, sometimes you get that right away, and sometimes you see that level off a bit. So, that hunger, that need for foods tends to decrease over time.
So, is this something that I could do if I was eating most of my meals at the dining facility on base?
So it will really depend on which protocol that someone would want to implement to decide if the dining facility could actually be a part of their fasting protocol. So, for example, if you are fasting for 24 hours completely, then obviously you wouldn't be going to the dining facility at all 1 or 2 days a week. But if you are doing an 8 hour feed window and a 16-hour fast window, then you might be able to sneak 1 or 2 meals in there. In that feed window, though, it's still really important to get all the calories that you need for exercise, to support your muscle, to support your recovery. So your meals tend to be a lot larger than you normally would eat
Yeah.
simply because you have 8 hours of time to get those calories than you would in usually a 12 to 14 hour
Yeah,
time.
you're basically trying to cover all the calories that you're about to expend in the fasting period within your eating period.
Yes, exactly. So instead of your normal size plate, you might have to get 2 or even 3 plates in some cases.
That sounds challenging too.
Yes. So that's actually one of the complaints that I get from clients is when they come in, they'll say, I don't know how much more I can eat. I get so full and I don't think I can put more calories in my body at that time.
Yeah, so what are some good ways to get that calorie count in without filling yourself up so much?
That's a great question. So, to get the calories that you need, you would really want to focus on energy dense foods. So, we know that some foods contain a lot of nutrients, like an apple, for example, whereas others, such as avocado, are a small volume food that has a ton of calorie value to it. So, things like avocados, guacamole, nuts, peanut butter, any of the energy dense foods, even some of the grains. So, rice, potatoes, bread can be a really big benefit in addition to getting the protein that the person needs when they go to eat their meals.
Right. So when people do this fasting, if they decide to go for a longer period of time, I feel like you'd get almost like a vitamin deficiency. Should you be taking vitamins and everything else that you need throughout this fasting to support what you're missing out on?
So, if you decide to follow an intermittent fasting protocol for several weeks or even several months, then you're absolutely correct in that they could have some foods that are missing from their diet, and it could lead to deficiency or a depletion of some sort. So, in this situation, if they are not getting enough fruits and vegetables, then a multivitamin could be warranted. If they are not consuming enough fatty acids, so things like salmon or tuna or flaxseed, chia seeds, walnuts, then they might need a supplement with an omega-3. One of the vitamins that I talk about quite a bit as far as almost everybody needing a maintenance dose is vitamin D, and especially in the military when people are wearing long sleeves and long pants all the time, then it's very common to see a depletion of vitamin D.
Right.
But overall, if you're getting the portion sizes that you need from the foods that you're eating regularly, then there really isn't a need to supplement. We say it all the time, but food first and supplement second.
Right.
Yeah, so it sounds like you can still eat a well-balanced diet and get everything you need. You would just be limiting the times that you'd be.
Exactly.
And is the main goal, is it weight loss?
So the main purpose of intermittent fasting is usually intended to be weight loss and particularly body fat loss.
So if I'm trying to get my beach body ready and I have a couple of weeks before the summer, is this something that I could do for that?
So typically with intermittent fasting, what we've seen in the research is a lot of the studies have been performed in animal models or on humans that are participating in Ramadan. So it's not, so it's not even a protocol that has been well established in humans that exercise regularly. So I'm assuming that for your beach body, you would have a regular exercise protocol.
Of course.
So
Gains. But in intermittent fasting, are people allowed to hydrate while they're fasting? Is it just water or can we drink anything?
That's a great question. So they can drink anything that does not have calories in it. So non-caloric fluids, that includes water, flavored water, water with electrolytes in it, black coffee, no cream or sugar, and unsweetened tea, just to name a few.
Yeah.
If they were following a Ramadan fast, then they couldn't
Oh, yeah.
because of religious purposes. But in traditional intermittent fasting protocols, whether it doesn't matter which method you're following, you can certainly stay hydrated. And it's encouraged to stay hydrated during.
Okay, good. Because hydration is really important, clearly, in the military.
Yeah,
community.
definitely.
You could potentially utilize intermittent fasting for a few weeks, but long term, we don't have any great research studies on what those side effects look like, especially in humans. So right now, all we know is that it could potentially benefit somebody for a short duration of time in terms of body fat loss or body composition, but there are some side effects that can come with that as well.
Right. What exactly are the side effects that could come along with that?
With the side effects, I would never recommend this to anyone that has any sort of negative relationship with food or has any shame or guilt around food, any health conditions.
You mean like eating disorder kind of stuff?
Yeah, disordered eating or eating disorders, absolutely. This would not be
Yeah.
recommended for them. Anyone who has health conditions like diabetes or cardiovascular disease or any health conditions that require medications, fasting is definitely not appropriate for that. And even lean individuals, they just don't have enough body fat stores to pull from
Right.
when they're fasting. So, so we're looking at men with less than 10% of body fat, women with less than 20% body fat. Probably not the most appropriate diet for them to be following.
Really? Because that doesn't sound that low to me.
No, I mean, it seems like with the amount of time that you're actually fasting, it doesn't seem like you'd lose too much energy. But at the same time, I can see, like, for me, I'm a pretty skinny guy, and I like to eat, and I know that I need to eat throughout the day just to maintain my metabolism speed if I want to gain weight. So it seems like if I fast, it's going to really crank up my metabolism, and I won't be able to really gain any weight.
That's a really common statement that I get a lot from soldiers or consults that I have coming in my office is, I think that fasting will allow me to increase my metabolism or that fasting might compromise my metabolism. And really, we have calories that are required of our bodies. Our bodies require calories
Right.
to just maintain our normal basal organ function. So our brain needs to think, our lungs need to breathe, our heart needs to beat daily, and that requires a significant amount of calories. For the average man, it takes at least 2,000 calories a day. So if you are exercising on top of that, then you're expending a lot more energy than you probably realize. And fasting can really pull from your energy stores in your muscles, and it can start breaking down that muscle and breaking down a lot of the fuel that you have stored up, so it can compromise exercise on the back end of that as well.
So exercise is never something we want to compromise if we're trying to make gains in the gym. Um, Specifically, maybe people are trying to get stronger, but at the same time, trying to cut up and get leaner. So it sounds like this could make them cut and get leaner, but the getting stronger piece or the getting those good intense workouts, if I haven't eaten and I'm feeling exhausted, my workout's probably not going to be the best.
Right, exactly. So at the end of the day, a calorie deficit is what is going to really reduce body fat. So whether that's coming from intermittent fasting protocols or just reducing calorie consumption throughout the day, you'll see that leanness start to develop. But with the fasting protocols, a lot of dietitians will hesitate to recommend fasting protocols for those that are exercising at high intensities or long durations, because we know, and it's really well established, that those high intensity exercise bouts predominantly use carbohydrate as a fuel source. So if you are fasting and you're burning through all of the carbohydrate that's in your muscle for your fuel, then you will have to break down muscle for fuel during those workouts. So to really maintain your exercise, somebody could potentially use fasting when they're doing more aerobic based workouts that predominantly rely on fat as a fuel source. So something like a slow jog or a yoga class where you're still moving, but it's very light in nature, and you can still talk to somebody during that exercise bout. That would be more aerobic and would be more, more giving towards the fasting protocols than the high intensity, long duration exercise would be.
Right. So basically fasting is like not for people that are trying to do bodybuilding or people about my size, so the leaner guys. This is mainly for people that want to lose body fat or lose some weight in a shorter period of time.
Yes, so it could be used for that. And like I said, in the research, it still is not well established in human studies. So where we're at with the recommendations now is a caloric deficit will produce a reduction in body fat. So if it's easier for you to fast to produce that caloric deficit, then that is something that you could talk to your dietitian about to see how you could incorporate that so that it won't compromise your exercise performance as well. But really the best diet is the one that you can stick to. So if at the end of the day you get too hangry and
That would be me.
you can't seem to stick with it, then maybe a everyday caloric deficit would be a better approach for you.
Okay.
Yeah, and it seems like if you want to lose weight, you should be eating more frequently throughout the day. So
Right.
small amounts and still a caloric deficit, but you should be eating several times a day as opposed to you only have a limited window to eat and you might only get 2 meals during that window. So it just seems, I can see where the controversy comes in.
Yes, because that's definitely the small frequent eating bouts is definitely a more traditional approach to weight loss. And that comes from trying to control your insulin and trying to control your blood sugar. So we know that if you can control those two parameters, insulin and blood sugar, then you can control your weight more effectively. So eating consistently every few hours allows you to do that. And therefore, as long as you're eating less calories, you will produce a loss in body fat as well. But that's not to say some studies have shown in intermittent fasting protocols that it helps over time if you are on an intermittent fasting protocol for a few weeks, that it actually can help with insulin sensitivity to some degrees too. So while I wouldn't recommend intermittent fasting hands down for everybody, that's not to say that it couldn't work for anybody.
So
either.
this is just one of the many methods that you could use.
Yes, it's a tool in the toolbox for sure.
Awesome.
So it sounds like this can work well with weight loss and fat loss, but when we're looking at human performance optimization, can this enhance performance?
So that's a great question. Can intermittent fasting enhance performance? And really, the athlete first needs to have sound nutritional practices to begin with. If I have somebody that walks in my office and has tried every different diet on the shelf, then that's something that we don't know really what works and what doesn't. So they need to start with very sound nutritional practices. And we do know that lower intensity exercises predominantly relies on fat, whereas higher intensity exercise tends to rely more on carbohydrate as fuel. So there has been a school of thought proposed by two strength coaches, and they're actually also dietitians, that aerobic based exercise, if you're fasting in the morning before that, and then utilizing caffeine also, that you could increase the utilization of fat during that long, slow aerobic exercise bout, but making sure that they're fueling during exercise if it is longer than an hour, and making sure that right afterwards they're getting a combination of carbohydrate and protein. If you have somebody who's doing a high intensity anaerobic based exercise bout, so something like circuit work or sprints, carrying heavy loads, then that is something where intermittent fasting has really not shown to be much benefit, because that will compromise their energy output and tends to lead to muscle breakdown as
Wow.
well.
Okay. So when we're thinking about our operators that are deploying downrange, going on missions, they might have to do a long infill with a heavy ruck. So it could be a long duration, but there could be times where they have to sprint if they're in a firefight. So there could be high intensity. Is this something that they could be doing or should be doing to optimize their performance downrange?
So, when a soldier is downrange, they need to be able to perform at a high level at any moment. And that could include sprinting, carrying heavy loads, focusing really quickly on their target, and, like you mentioned, for long periods of time. So, those tasks require full glycogen stores, or basically full stores of glucose that we use predominantly for energy. And that glucose is what allows us to sustain intensity for a long period of time. So, with somebody who's downrange that needs to perform high intensity bouts at any moment's notice, then they need to have those full glycogen stores. And we know that intermittent fasting, no matter which protocol you're following, is depleting those glycogen stores. So, intermittent fasting would not be the most appropriate recommendation in that situation, because they need to compete, or need to perform, I should say. Whereas if they are back in the United States and they are training and they don't have that immediate need to perform at their peak, then that's when it may be more appropriate to start experimenting with the fasting protocols.
So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know of a lot of people that will deploy and then come back and they're a lot bigger from just working out all the time or actually going out on missions. So it seems like it makes sense not to fast out there, since like if you don't have that time, then you really need to eat when you can.
Yeah, and it really comes down to the preparedness. So, whether you have plenty of days in between missions or not, it still is super important for those glycogen stores to be full, because you never know when you're going to get that call. So, those glycogen stores need to be full so that you can perform at your peak, and not just for yourself, but for your team and the mission.
Right.
So, it's very crucial that during those types of situations that they are not utilizing fasting, and that while they're in a more of a training scenario, that it could be experimented with more.
Right.
That makes sense. So maybe when they're back here in the rear, they can experiment with it, see if it works to meet their goals. And then when they're forward deployed, when it's really go time, then they should be eating a well-balanced diet and fueling appropriately for their missions.
Yes, and that's the key, is really finding what works for the person. And so we know that what works when you're downrange is having those full glycogen stores and having those well-balanced meals so that they can perform at their peak day after day, week after week, for however long they're going to be there. Whereas when they're here training, figuring out what works best is really not just the individual figuring it out on their own, but talking with their local strength coach, talking with the local dietitian, and saying, is this appropriate? Here's what my goal is, and this is what I'm trying to achieve or what I'm training for. And, I'm interested in this, but how could I incorporate it, or when would it be the most beneficial for me? And that's what all of Thor3 is really here for, is to help the soldier optimize their performance, but also optimize their recovery as well.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point that there's so many resources out there. So for any one of our operators or enablers that have access to Thor3, if I want to go in and meet with a dietitian and get a plan, how do I do that?
Yes, so I will speak to our location at the schoolhouse. There are 2 dietitians that are currently working there, myself and my colleague Christina. If you wanted to get an individualized meal plan, then you could swing by our office any point in time. We have an open door policy. You could send us an email. You could talk to any one of our Thor3 strength and conditioning coaches, physical therapists, and they can refer you to us. So any type of way to basically talk with our Thor folks, they'll get you linked in with us, and we can get you the resources that you need.
That sounds
Awesome. Yeah.
great, because I think on the outside, when you're going to civilian dietitians, it's pretty expensive.
It can be. A consult with a dietitian can range anywhere between $75 to $150 just for one hour session with a dietitian. So to have Thor3, whether it's dietitians or strength coaches or physical therapists, basically at the soldier's beck and call for free is our fantastic resources. So we are here for that reason. We're here to optimize performance, optimize recovery, and really help the soldier meet their goal.
Do you have any final recommendations or tips for people that would like to try fasting for the first time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a final recommendation or take home point, I think first it's always important to evaluate why you as the individual would want to try this, and if you are in a situation that intermittent fasting would benefit you truly. So only try experimenting with intermittent fasting when you don't have to be ready to perform at your peak at a moment's notice. Choose the time restricted feeding windows over other fasting patterns. That way, it allows adequate fuel intake every day and will have the smallest negative impact on your recovery from exercise. Also, plan training sessions outside of fasting times to minimize your negative effects on performance. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, the best diet is one that you can stick to. So you could incorporate fasting into rest days, or if you're aerobically exercising for short periods of time, but make sure that your diet is one that you can stick to. And at the end of the day, eating less calories is something that will reduce body fat and promote weight loss, whether it's from fasting or just reducing calories as a whole.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you, Jenny. Thanks for coming out and sharing that message with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, for next time, we're going to be talking about stimulants, energy drinks, and caffeinated drinks. Join me.
And Christina and the Thor3 podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe for more, and follow us on our other platforms.